Hello, welcome back to the Blossoming Together podcast. Today we have a guest speaker, and before I introduce her, I want to kind of go over our key objectives and remind you guys that you should be listening for our code words throughout the podcast. So our first objective is through collaboration with an SLP guest speaker, BCB professionals will evaluate the effectiveness of current prompting strategies in supporting individuals with Gestalt language processing.
Our second learning objective is remaining within your scope of competence while working as a part of an interdisciplinary team.
All right, on to the fun stuff. We have Morgan here. She's a lead speech pathologist at Blossom Children's Center. She is familiar with Gestalt language processing. That's going to be the topic of our podcast today. So Morgan, how did you fall into this role of lead SLP?
Hi, everyone. I'm Morgan. I've been a speech-language pathologist working with kids for 3 years now, and I've been at Blossom for 2 years. I've always had a passion for working with autistic kids specifically, and my caseload was really high at Blossom. Yeah. So about 90% of my kids were autistic, and, I just found that a lot of them are really stuck either at that single word level or we'll get into it later, but delayed echolalia. And I really didn't know how to support them. So I became interested in Gestalt language processing, and I took the meaningful speech course, and it's been my passion ever since.
That's awesome. So you've been really diving into this Gestalt language processing. How long have you been in the field as like a speech path?
3 years.
3 years? Awesome.
Yes.
All right. So let's get into it.
Yes. Okay. So before we jump into the core content, I want to clarify, how do you pronounce, I'm not even going to try and say it, GLP?
Yes. So it's a German term. So it's technically Gestalt, but I've heard other clinicians say Gestalt. I will probably refer to it as GLP just to make it easier. And then I do want to make a note before we get into this. So NLA, natural language acquisition, that is the therapy approach in the guidelines that we use when working with Gestalt language processors. So if you hear me talk about natural language acquisition or NLA, it's the same thing as GLP. That's just the approach that we use to help support our kids.
Thank you.
Yes.
That clarifies it.
All right.
So what exactly is Gestalt language processing, and who is a Gestalt language processor?
So I'm going to start with that there's 2 ways that we learn or process language. So the first way, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, is analytic language processing. So I think of my typically developing 2-year-old nephew, and most likely your girls as well. So he processes language in single words or units. So these are our word babies. So we start with learning 1 word, and then we jump to 2-word phrases, 3-word phrases, and so on. As opposed to Gestalt language processing, they are our intonation babies. So they process language in chunks or phrases. So what this might look like is high intonation patterns, unintelligible speech where we may not be able to understand what they're saying. They may have some stuck single words, as well as immediate and delayed echolalia.
So you noted before, like at the beginning, that like the stage. So what are the stages of Gestalt language processing, and how do they progress through in them?
There are 4 main stages for natural language acquisition or Gestalt language processing. So stage 1 is our echolalia stage. So the kids in this stage have a lot of immediate or delayed echolalia. So the difference between that, immediate echolalia, they repeat exactly what you say from verbatim. So if I asked you, Yusra, what is this? The immediate echolalia would be, what is this? So you would repeat exactly what I say, or even like, is it? You would repeat partial or the full thing that I say. Whereas delayed echolalia is what they recalled from the past. So that could be recalling their favorite songs, their favorite books, or even something that an adult had said to them in the past. So one of the examples that I give parents is if a child fell down on the slide and a parent said, are you okay? And the kid picked that up and repeated, are you okay? And the next instance, when they fall down or if they hurt their finger, they're using that delayed echolalia and recalling, are you okay? So that would be an example of delayed echolalia.
And then the next stage?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even finish stage one. Okay. So stage one, our Gestalt language processors, they need more Gestalts. So this is the stage where we would be modeling short phrases and new Gestalts. Once we have enough Gestalts that are varied in, we want to make sure they're able to request. We want to make sure they can comment, protest, express joy, as well as transition. Once we feel like they have enough of those and they're operating in 50% of the next stage, then we would move to the second stage, which is mitigation.
Sure.
So stage 2 is the mitigation stage. And to give an example of one of my kiddos who is in stage 1 right now, one of her scripts from a YouTube show is, look at this. So I am going to start modeling stage 2 Gestalts with her. So I want to make sure I can mitigate that phrase that she has, look at this. So something that I would model if we were playing with dinosaurs, look at the dinosaur. So I'm mixing and matching her original script and I'm modeling something new to see if she'll pick that up. So I would model, look at the dinosaur, or even if I wanted her to get my attention, look at me is something I can model. So that's mitigation, mixing and matching different phrases that we can use.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then stage 3 is our single word isolation stage and our referential stage. And we call this the magical stage of NLA because this is when we start to see some of that self-generated language. And this is where we would work on single words. So I noted briefly in stage 1 how they can have those stuck single words.
Right.
So I'll explain the difference between what a stuck single word is and what's actually meaningful in stage 3.
Yeah.
So a stuck single word would be if they're looking at an aquarium and they just point to the aquarium and say fish.
Right.
There's a lot of different animals in the aquarium. So that would be an example of a stuck single word.
Right.
For example, and then when we get to stage 3, they're actually pointing at that fish and saying fish. So it has true meaning to it. So, and once we get to stage 3, it's kind of like stage 1 of the analytic language learning. So we're starting from square one there. So we would work on 1-word phrases and then jump to 2-word phrases and so on.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then once we get to stage 4, that stage 4 through 6 are our grammar stages. So we'll work on beginning grammar, intermediate grammar, as well as advanced grammar.
Right.
And once we get to stage 4, that's when we start to, or stage 3 and stage 4, that's when we start to see their receptive language skills significantly increase. So maybe they're able to answer WH questions and follow directions because they have that self-generated sentences.
So it's not until they get to that 3rd stage, which I think that's where sometimes it gets tricky when collaborating, because a lot of times we started out like very early with our learners. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And then I wanted to make another note too, because this is something that parents bring up a lot. And I know you and I have shared a client. So I'll use him for example. He was in the later stages of NLA. So he was nearing 5 and 6, where his grammar was age appropriate for his age, and we were nearing discharge.
Right.
And one of parents' biggest concern and some of their pushback was in moments where he was dysregulated or upset, he would resort back to some of his delayed echolalia in stage 1. So I just want to make that noted that is typical. He didn't regress back. He's not back in stage 1. We look up which stage he is mostly operating in. So he was mostly operating in those later stages, but it's okay when he is emotional or stressed.
Same thing with us, right?
Yes.
When I'm crying, I don't want you to talk to me.
It's hard for me to communicate.
No, and that's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, it's hard to communicate. So that's fair for him to go back to his stage 1 scripts too. And like once a Gestalt language processor, always a Gestalt language processor is what I tell parents. And we worked a lot with the family on working on like coping strategies and everything.
I think that's such a good point that you noted. As parents or even other clinicians, don't look at that as a regression.
Yeah.
It's not a regression. They're just progressing as they need to. And sometimes they're going to fall back to what's easiest for them when they're stressed out.
Exactly. Yep. And we just have to be there to help support and co-regulate them and acknowledge their scripts. Yeah.
Great. So how long has Gestalt language processing been around?
Yeah, it's actually been around since 1983 by Ann Peters and Barry Present. Yeah.
Wait, that's longer than I thought.
I know.
I thought it was
we weren't even born.
Yeah, we weren't born yet. Who knows what was going on back then?
Yeah.
All right, and why do you feel like it's gained so much traction recently? Because I feel like even before, like as a technician, whenever I would talk to speech pathologists, no one was bringing up Gestalt language processing.
Yeah.
It's something that's come up, I would say, last year that I've been hearing about it.
Yeah, and this was something that I was never taught in grad school too. So once I got into the real world, I was a little surprised learning about this as well. But I think social media played a huge role in educating us about Gestalt language processing. And I go back to a year and a half ago at Blossom when, we work at an autism center. 90% of my caseload are ASD kids. And I felt like I was really stuck with a lot of my kids where I'm like, I don't know where to go next. We can't get past this delayed echolalia, or we're stuck at the single word level. So Meaningful Speech, which is the course that I took, she put a lot of information on social media, which I feel like gained a lot of traction. So I was able to educate myself, and I've taken her course. So I think that played a huge role.
It's crazy that in this day and age, like social media plays such a big impact on our practices. We're learning so much from that. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a big part of our learning. I want to pause really quick for our first code word for your CEUs. It's going to be child-led.
Awesome.
Great. Jump back in.
Love that word.
All right. Another question I had is, does Gestalt language processing only apply to autistic learners or autistic individuals?
Yeah, no, it actually doesn't. So Marge Blanc reports in her research, approximately 85% of Gestalt language processors are autistic.
Okay.
However, I do want to caution you about that because it is a little subjective. But I also agree with that at some point because 90% of my caseload are autistic kids, and I would say about 85% of them are GLP. So to me personally, I feel like that number is pretty accurate. And typically developing kids can also be Gestalt language processors. So we all could have been Gestalt language processors, but we just fly through the stages really, really fast that we didn't need support.
Oh, interesting.
See, I never thought about it that way. I only thought about it relating to our autistic population. I didn't realize that
we could have been Gestalt. And maybe we were. We don't know.
Yeah.
Our parents didn't tell us.
Yeah. My mom wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
Could have been. Often the jargon, the unintelligible utterances is mistaken for jargon. So we totally could have been, and then just flew through it so fast that we ended up in stage 1 with our single words. Yep.
Well, great. Well, going back into the research, I feel like you had some points that you wanted to make, right?
Yeah. So you referenced Marge Blanc, kind of an area. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. And we've heard some discussion in the field that there's a little bit lack of research. But you mentioned Marge Blanc. Is there any other research that you guys follow when targeting GLPs?
Yeah, so in 2012, she had a longitudinal study that followed autistic kids who are Gestalt language processors using that NLA model. And so years later, they caught up with, I believe they were now adult autistic or autistic adults.
Yeah.
And they reported that they preferred having the Gestalt phrases over the taught phrases.
Yeah.
So they preferred having language naturally modeled to them rather than having those taught phrases. So Gestalt language processors, they are going to pick up phrases that they want to pick up. So not everything that I'm modeling, they're going to pick up. So it's whatever is meaningful to them.
Right.
Sure.
So what is, going back, I feel like I want to touch a little bit on it. What is what would be the traditional approach? If you were trying to teach me a phrase, you would just sit.
For an analytic learner?
Yeah, for an analytic learner.
Yeah, I would probably teach. We'll get into this later, but I want whatever. Yep, that's more of a taught phrase.
Okay.
Whereas Gestalt phrases are more naturally. So I'm just modeling. I'm not expecting them to say anything. If they do, great. But there's no expectation there.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's whatever they pick up. And back to the research. So they also reported that they preferred having choosing their own phrases to work on self generation for communication, as well as regulation and self-advocacy skills.
Yeah.
So, we could get into this a little bit more too, but it is very descriptive. And I feel like that is a little bit of a struggle for the BCBAs just because our data is our language samples.
Right. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's going to be like where it's a little bit hard for us because it is so descriptive and anecdotal.
Where we want to look at like the objective,
what do you think
measurable.
about it?
Yeah, like for me, it's very hard. Like I don't think subjectively. I don't, you know, I can't guess what someone's saying. So I take a lot of what I see literally, like not literally, like I know a script is, you know, there might be like communication and there might be scripting something, but I feel like I personally, or like I as a BCBA cannot deep dive into that. I can't be the person that like digs to try to figure out the meaning.
Or like assumes what they're trying to communicate with their phrasing. Like it's really hard for us.
It's very, very hard. So the most we'll talk about this a little bit later is like what we can do is we can take ABC data and report that back to you. Yes. But it's very hard for me to think subjectively. And I think that's where we start like, it doesn't make sense to me a lot of the time. Yeah. So that's where I think we start like, we're like, well, she told me like this person's a Gestalt language processor, but I go back confused sometimes. Like, I didn't understand what that meant.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm here to talk about it then.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm really glad. And I think that like when I'm looking for research, I'm looking for experimental studies. So are there any experimental studies out currently?
No, not yet. Marge's most recent study was done in 2023 with some others.
Okay, so it's not that first one that was done like
the 80s?
The 80s. No, there was one done in 2012. That was
that was a longitudinal study.
And then there was one in 2023.
Yes. Okay. And then one in the 80s, like you said, just confirming that there's two type of ways that we learn language and going through the stages.
The 80s wasn't Marge Blanc. Who was that again?
It was Ann Peters and Barry Present. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
And then in Marge's most recent study in 2023, it was more descriptive. So it wasn't an experimental study, basically confirming the findings from 2012 with some additional supports that we learned. Like we want to acknowledge their scripts and we want to go through these stages and model what's appropriate for each stage.
Right.
But I'm hoping in future research, it actually says we'll attach the research to this podcast. But in her research under the conclusion and future directions category, they do report that there is future research to be done. Hopefully some experimental studies with a control group where we have a set of GLPs and maybe half of them do the NLA approach and then the other half don't or do the traditional analytic approach. So I'm really curious to see the differences and findings in that.
I can't wait to see where research goes with this. It's going to be really
I feel like we love our research, so we're waiting
Give me a
for
study.
it.
I know.
I really wish and I hope to see other people other than like Marge Blanc do like the studies because I feel like that's the one you guys most commonly talk about where I wish I could look up more.
Sure.
Right? Because it feels like a little biased sometimes. Like she might be trying to prove her point from the first time around.
She is our queen, GLP. There are others listed on the research report, which, sorry, I can't think of their names off the top of my head, but that'll be for your guys.
They'll come to you anyways.
They're it all.
Yeah. Awesome. And then I was wondering, do you consider scripts and echolalia to be like, do you consider them in your language samples?
Yes. Yeah. So during our language samples, I try and take maybe 50 utterances for our language samples and I'm writing down or sometimes typing or even recording everything that the child is saying. And we score it based on which stage that they're in. So the delayed echolalia, all of that, if they're singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, I'm writing that down and I would score that as stage 1 because it's a delayed echolalia. And something that I want to mention too is all scripting and echolalia are forms of communication and they all have meaning. So one of the most difficult parts for our kiddos in stage 1 is doing that detective work.
Right.
Yeah.
So not all scripts are literal. We can't take everything literal. So for example, if they're singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, that might be that they want to listen to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. So my first thing that I would do is either start singing with them or I would play the song. It could also be that they're trying to express, I'm happy or I love this song. Or there's a lot of our kids at the center who every time they're dysregulated, they will cry and they'll sing a song. I think of this one boy in particular. He would sing, "Do you know the Muffin Man?" And that was him telling us that I'm sad. So we can't take all scripts literal.
Okay. That's good to know.
I think that's such a good point. And we'll talk a little bit more into digging and how we can collaborate. But it's so tricky, like you said, as BCBAs. How can we look into this within our sessions? So like you're saying, don't look at it literally. So user said collect ABC data, using that phrase as the behavior, so that B. And we want to know what's happening beforehand and after, like they have that phrase. And that's what we can present to the SLP to be like, okay, what does this phrase mean to you?
Yeah. Like, what should we be modeling instead?
Yeah.
Like, what are your suggestions? Because it is, like we said before, kind of we can't do that like subjective digging.
We can't just, it's not on us.
We're just sharing what we can see and measure, and we're sharing that with you.
I think that's a great idea to use that as ABC data and report to the SLP or even parents. What I love about Blossom is that we're always collaborating.
Yes.
So I could have the text, right? If they hear a phrase, right? Like write down what this means, or write down what they said. And like, we can all figure out together, like what this means. Or like if my kiddo goes into the OT session and they were really happy and they were saying this, we can all work together collaboratively to find the meaning.
I agree. Before we jump into anything else really exciting, our second CEU code word is GLP.
Ooh, great. GLP. Just the
three letters.
In it. Okay, awesome.
I guess it's not a word.
The way we're talking about it sounds like it is. All right. So I'm a BCBA and I'm coming to you. I want to know how I can help best support my GLP learners. What are you doing in your sessions to help support our learners that are GLPs?
Yeah. All of my sessions are child-led. So I'm following the child's lead throughout the session. If they are scripting, I am acknowledging their scripts and by repeating it back to them. And if it's highly unintelligible and I don't quite understand what they're saying, I'm just saying like, yeah, okay. Or even nodding my head along. Like, I just want them to know, like, I hear you. I understand you. And I feel like one of the biggest things that you guys might have been taught, we were taught in the past too, is to either ignore or redirect echolalia.
Yes,
so I want to make that
tricky.
clear. We don't want to do that. We really want to acknowledge what they're trying to say to us.
I think one thing people struggle with is like, acknowledge, like, you don't have to go in and deep dive into like every time. You could, like you said, just say okay, and move on. That's acknowledgement too. It doesn't have to be, oh, you just said XYZ.
You want this?
Yeah,
you
or like don't say that.
Yeah,
we never want to do that.
Yes,
so that's very helpful to know, and I feel like our listeners would like benefit from that.
Yeah.
So what else? Go back to it. What else?
Yeah, my sessions are child-led. I'm acknowledging all forms of communication. And depending on what stage they're in, I'm modeling appropriate phrases for that stage.
Right. With the phrases, so can you describe a little bit more detailed about like what mitigable phrases would look like in those different stages?
Yeah, absolutely. So in stage 1, we want to choose phrases that are mitigable. So we want to be able to mix and match. So I tend to do, and a lot of our other SLPs will do this too. I choose phrases that are words that are most likely contractions. So like the let's or the it's, or even I wanna. I'll do I wanna. Where are some that I'll do too.
Yeah.
We'll use those so they're easy to mitigate. So I talked about my friend in the past who said, now I'm blanking on what her script is. Oh, look at this. Look at this. So that is a stage 1 Gestalt, a delayed echolalia from her YouTube show.
Right.
So I'm looking to mitigate that. Okay. And I can use look as one of those. Right. So look, I could say, look at this. Look at me. Yeah. Check it out would be one.
Would you say check it out?
I don't know if I would do that one.
Yeah.
Or, for example, if one of their stuck single words were dog, I would model like, it's a dog. That way they would be able to mitigate, it's a dog, it's a horse, or even there's the gym, here's mommy, things like that.
When thinking about a mitigable phrase for like our BCBAs, think about it as something that they can generalize to other learning opportunities throughout their day.
Oh, I wanted to bring up one thing.
Yes.
I feel like open door is one that is overly generalized.
Because we're everywhere and we're like, what shall we do?
Open door.
Open door
That's the
every
prompt.
day.
That is one where I feel like BCBAs tend to teach. I don't know if that's part of the VB map or.
I think what is happening is the technician or like the BCB is looking for we look for every learning opportunity that is available
to request,
you know,
okay.
And you know, in our day, like most kids are motivated by going into like specific rooms. So in front of that, they're just like, okay, we're here. Like, what's another like learning opportunity? And I feel like we're prompting that open door.
Instead of saying, what do you want? We're like, open door.
Open door, yes. And that brings me to a good point because I feel like a lot of my GLPs tend to overgeneralize open door. So we see it like if I have a box or there's snacks, they're saying open door for that. Whereas I would model let's open it or open it rather than open door so they're not overgeneralizing that. Once we get to stage 3, we could teach open door, but since they don't have that attached meaning to whatever the door is, they're overgeneralizing that. So I always encourage my BCBAs or technicians to model let's open it or open it rather than open door.
I never thought about that. I literally never thought about that.
Yes, I was just talking to a BCBA about that the other day, so it made me think about that.
Amazing.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask, like, what about I want phrases or I want? I know, like, I already know.
Yeah. Wait. So I want phrases were historically taught by or done by well-meaning SLPs. So even me, like I said before, I used to teach I want phrases. But what we've noticed is that kids tend to get very prompt dependent on these I want phrases. Right. So one of my kids would scroll through his I want phrases and say, I want door, I want toy, I want snack. And we really didn't know what he actually wanted. He's just scrolling through his phrases. So I feel like I want phrases, it's a little bit trickier to mitigate those.
Okay. But I feel like it's so hard for me to understand because I wanna is you said I wanna is an okay one.
And I think it's just because historically in the past that we've already taught them that I want phrases. So either they're like waiting for the fill-in or they're not understanding the true meaning of it.
Wouldn't they be waiting for the fill-ins in the same
for the other phrases? So that's what if we were to use I want, but instead of waiting for that fill-in for them to auto fill it in, what if we said I want snack? I want and like modeled that. Why is that less meaningful?
Still going back to the scrolling. Like I've seen kids in the past that will just scroll and like truly we just don't understand the meaning. They're just like scrolling. They're memorizing these I want phrases that were taught to them and there's really no true meaning for it. And another thing that I want to point out too is it doesn't really sound natural to me. It sounds like really unnatural. So if you go to a playground with a bunch of preschoolers running around, you don't really hear I want swing, I want jungle gym. You hear let's go down the jungle or let's go down the slide, let's climb on the jungle gym, or I'm going down, things like that.
That makes sense to me because it clarifies that I should be modeling language that maybe like this child would be using because I want doesn't sound as natural, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Versus when we're saying it's just that's what's like easy for them to scroll because I feel like they can scroll anything. Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
And just think about how you guys like we wouldn't say like I want gym, we would say let's go to the gym or just like from an adult's perspective.
I think that's a good point. It's really hard. It was really, really hard for me to understand why like the let's phrases couldn't be overgeneralized like I want, but now that you're explaining it more and like we want to make it as natural for them as possible, that makes so much more sense and like it just
clarifies it a lot.
So much. Like
it's easy to mitigate too.
Yes.
Great. And then how can I, or like as, you know, if I have a child with an AAC, how can I help promote their language if they also have GLP?
Yeah. So we are always looking for the most robust system for them. So this is a topic for another day. Maybe you can bring me back for AAC podcast. But we're going to use the most robust system, and that typically looks like a high-tech AAC device or what may look like to us an iPad.
Yeah.
So it's self-generated. You hit a button. It's quick and easy, and it tells it back to you.
Right. Yeah.
So by specifying or by individualizing it to a GLP, we would add their specific phrases that we're targeting in a folder. So there's no set of gestalts that I would have for each kid.
What do you call the folder?
My phrases.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll typically label it my phrases or Johnny, if their name was Johnny's phrases.
Right.
And we want to make sure that we have phrases that they are picking up on and making sure that they're able to self-advocate, request, and negate.
Nice.
Something else that like I think you and I we had a learner who used an AC device. Something else is like we don't only want things that we're working on at the center. Like we want to collaborate like with the SLP and the parent to know what phrases to put in that folder for home so that they can be working on these like language phrases throughout their whole day.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a great friend. I loved working with him.
Me too.
And one of his Gestalt phrases that we worked on, I had under the reading folder, he was a big brown bear guy. So he had one that let's read brown bear. So that would be an example of how it's individualized to our friend.
Yeah, that learner.
That's great. So let's kind of dive into like our collaboration strategies, what we can do as like PCBAs to help. But we talked about how to best support the learner, right? Like if they have GLP.
Yeah.
Based on that already?
We kind of talked about how she would do it in her sessions.
Okay. So how would we do it in our sessions?
Yeah, translating that to us. So how can we, when sometimes it's hard for us to follow that same teaching style, what things can we take from what you're suggesting into our sessions?
Always consult with your SLP and they can let you know what stage the child is operating in, because that's going to be a big test of what you need to work on. Like, are we working on single words? Are we working on grammar? Or are we working, or do these kids need more gestalts? So always consult with your SLP to see what stage they're in.
Yeah.
And I would just continue to model naturally within their environment. So like I said, my sessions are very laid back and child-led, where I'm just modeling language naturally and commenting and describing maybe what we're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
There's something you pointed out that you do to me is like you take data a little differently with the Gestalt language processor, right?
Yes. So when I'm targeting, especially like, so we kind of touched on, I think, a little bit on like labeling. You don't want us to use those question phrases.
Questions.
Like the what, like what is that? Or even like leaving that open fill in the blank. Because usually with a learner who's doing tacting or labeling, I would say, I see A, and wait for them to tell me what they see, because that's the skill I'm looking for. But you've noted that like we shouldn't be doing that until level 3 or like Gestalt, what is it?
Yep, stages 3
Stage
and 4.
3?
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't incorrect. So, but I still need to target tacting.
Yeah. Like, unfortunately.
It's
like,
part of our
job. If, you know, we can't just jump around. Like, we can't just focus on one domain. So when we're writing our goals, we do have to pull from, like, those labeling domains along with, like, the requesting domains. And, you know, even some of those, like, fill-in domains, I know that you said you wouldn't really want us to start working on.
Right.
Only because that's just where our assessment tool and our like research has shown us what is what we need to be doing.
Right. Our research is a little different. And that's okay. So going back to like what I've done to kind of collaborate and modify my goals is I will write my goal up as learner will identify 3 or whatever number of targets, items with a verbal model. So I'm counting in that prompt within my learner's goal, and then I use an errorless teaching approach. So I will model the phrases for them without expectation in hopes that they imitate me, and I will collect data on if they imitated the model or not. And then I'll also have an incidental teaching tracker where I won't be modeling. This is where I'm tracking if they are throughout their day labeling on their own. So I've modeled throughout the whole day. It's a star. It's a fish. It's a ball. And now they walk past a caterpillar, like in the hallway, and they on their own say, it's a caterpillar. And I collect that as my independent learning opportunity, because we still need to note those within like ABA sessions.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's exactly how I do it too. And like that would be an example of a mitigation. Mitigating
That makes sense.
Nice. All right. Are there any other tips that you would have for us?
Always accepting all forms of communication, presuming competence, like presuming that the child knows what they're doing or knows how to say this and has that capability, as well as providing, like modeling naturally within their environment.
I think something that we kind of touched on like in our like just work life that I kind of wanted to touch on today is the difference between a prompt within speech and a prompt in ABA.
Yes.
So
this is something that I struggled with not being in the ABA field.
Oh my gosh.
Please explain.
Before we get into it, like, or before, like we were just talking, let's just share that story, is you were kept saying like, well, that's like, you're prompting too much. You're over prompting. And we sat there and we're like, we don't get it. Like, we're just giving an instruction.
Whereas like we see what you're doing as a prompt, as we're like, but wait, you're prompting. Why can't we prompt?
So the big thing was what you were considering our prompt. That was always the instruction, especially for those like labeling goals that we have. We were going, what is it? And we were waiting for a response. You guys were thinking like that what is it was the prompt, whereas we were just thinking that's an instruction. We don't get why they keep saying it's like we're prompting them.
Whereas like I wouldn't say that and I would just model the whole phrase. Like
So I guess that was like, it was a little bit tricky. So like we can prompt, just use that model prompt and avoid fill in the blank phrases under the like guidance and advice of your SLP. Make sure you're collaborating.
We don't want to do that because that will get them stuck in that stage one. We're not at the single word level yet.
Right. Yeah. And you briefly like minimally touched on stuck single words. So can you touch on that a little bit more detail? What does that look like and what is it?
Yeah. So stuck single words would be in stage one. So I like to use the example. I don't know if I've said that, or the kids are at the zoo and they point and label lion.
Right.
There's really no meaning to that because there's really not a lion in the picture, but they're like associating that it's at the zoo.
Okay.
Versus when we get to stage 3 and they point to a lion and say lion, that's more meaningful. They're attaching that meaning to the word.
Okay.
Yeah. So stage 1, they're just not there yet.
Yeah.
And what you would say is like to avoid those questions, right?
Yes. That's another great tip too. Thank you for reminding me to decrease the amount of questions that we ask.
I feel like it's so hard for us. Even.
It's hard. That's one of our goals. So we're like, how often can we provide this? But remembering maybe like setting a criteria for how many times you do it and the rest of the session just modeling that like we see a lion.
And I still catch myself doing that in my sessions too. Like I'm still learning as well and trying to catch myself too. Like, oh, we got to reduce our questions. Let's just model. Or even sometimes I'll just having a silent session. Like I'll spend like 5 minutes just not saying anything and just listening and writing down what my kiddo is saying.
Right.
That goes a long way as well.
Right.
Before we get into our next little topic, our third code word is going to be collaborate.
Nice. All right. So question. So I want to kind of like, or not really question. I kind of want to start talking about how we can modify our goals to best like fit a GLP learner.
Yeah.
And if you feel like that's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe give an example.
Yes. So what are you thinking with your goals? Like, are we trying to avoid the fill in the blank phrases?
Yep. So I'm trying to teach an interverbal. And right now, like the VB map, that one goal is like fills in simple phrases. Like
10 simple phrases.
Yep. So like ready, set, go. You would probably say don't work on that, right? But, we have to. So now what do we do?
Yeah. So
I would model the whole phrase, ready, set, go.
Like the errorless?
Yeah.
Yes. So did we touch on that yet?
I think
like
so.
A little bit of errorless. So utilizing that errorless teaching approach has been really beneficial in my sessions. And I know not everyone can do that. So with a grain of salt, sometimes as like different disciplines, we might have to like agree to disagree.
Yes, exactly.
But I think what we should take away and the key thing that we should keep in mind is like modifying when we can. So utilizing as many approaches as like at Morgan or the SLP will be recommending to me. I'm still modeling. I'm still providing those opportunities that she wants, but I still have to do what
I need to do.
Is required of me.
Exactly.
And I know I don't want to like delay the child's like acquisition of language, but I think that there's a way that we could do both.
Yeah.
Right.
And, we have 2 different lenses. The way that we look at things, like you said, we're going to agree to disagree, but I feel like we can all agree on we just want to best support our clients.
Right.
Yeah, that's all that we care about.
That's great. So to wrap up, I kind of go over our key learning things that we learned. Do you want to start?
Yes, maybe. Let me think about it. Give me like
all right. I'll start.
Yes. I learned a lot about more of your guys' terminology, and I really like the idea about taking ABC data because I think that's going to be really crucial in helping support our clients best because you guys are with the kids way more than I am. Unfortunately, we're only able to see them maybe a couple times a week for 30 minutes where you're with them all day, all week.
Right.
Yes.
So that's going to be really crucial in having actual data on there where we can do that detective work and discover that meaning of the phrase so we can best support them.
Great. I feel like I learned that we should just, take that time, model, and accept all forms of communication.
Yeah. I love that. Kind of going off of that, I think something that I really learned and in time with working with so many SLPs is to not question. Like, we shouldn't be quizzing the child all day, every day. Like, let them show us what they, what skills they have.
Yeah. And give them the teaching moments, model, stuff of that sort.
Yeah. So while we're modeling.
Yeah. I love that.
Awesome. Well, Morgan, we would love to have you back.
Please come back.
Yeah, for the AC episode.
Thanks for having me.
Anytime. And for everyone else watching, we'll see you guys later. Talk to you. That was bad. That was not the right word.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my God. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want your CEU credits, go to our website at blossomchildrencenter.com.
Talk to you later.
See you.